My name is Wilson, and I just turned 32 last month. When my younger brother Jack invited me to his birthday dinner at that fancy restaurant downtown, I thought maybe, just maybe, we could finally repair our broken relationship. I was wrong. So very wrong. The humiliation of being seated at a fold-out chair next to the trash cans while everyone else enjoyed the family table was just the beginning. Then came the $3,200 bill that changed everything. Before I tell you how I got my sweet revenge, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next. Growing up, Jack and I were actually pretty close, despite the 5-year age gap between us. I can still remember teaching him how to ride a bike, helping him with his homework, and defending him from neighborhood bullies. On summer nights, we would camp out in the backyard with flashlights, telling ghost stories until Mom made us come inside. Those were simple times, happy times before everything fell apart. When I was 15 and Jack was 10, our parents decided to get divorced. It wasn't amicable, to put it mildly. The fights, the screaming, the tension that filled every corner of our house had been building for years, but the actual separation still hit us like a freight train. What made it worse was how they divided us up like property. Mom took Jack. Dad took me. Just like that, our family was split down the middle. At first, I tried so hard to maintain my relationship with Jack and Mom. I would call every day after school, asking about his day, telling him about mine, trying to keep that brotherly bond intact despite living across town. For the first few months, he seemed eager to talk to me too. But gradually, those conversations became shorter, his responses more clipped. I noticed he started screening my calls, and when I did get through, I could hear Mom in the background telling him to wrap it up. "I gotta go," Wilson became his standard line. "Mom says dinner is ready," or "Mom says I need to do homework," or just "Mom says I have to go now." Dad saw what was happening but felt powerless to stop it. "Your mother is." He would start then, stop himself not wanting to badmouth her in front of me. But the unspoken accusation hung in the air between us. She was turning Jack against me, against us. About a year after the divorce, Mom met Robert. Robert Bennett was everything my dad wasn't. Wealthy, connected, ambitious. He owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states and lived in a mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. When Mom married him 6 months later, Jack moved into that mansion too. And the final threads connecting us seemed to snap completely. Meanwhile, Dad struggled. The divorce had drained his savings, and he had to downsize from our family home to a small 2-bedroom apartment. He picked up extra shifts at the factory where he worked, but it was never quite enough. By the time I was 16, I was working weekends at a local grocery store, giving most of my paycheck to Dad for bills. By 17, I added evenings at a gas station. My grades suffered, but we kept the lights on. Through it all, I kept trying to reach out to Jack. I'd save up to buy him birthday and Christmas presents, only to receive nothing in return. I'd get the occasional text, usually when he needed something. A ride when his car was in the shop, help with a school project, or just cash when he'd spent his allowance too quickly. I always said yes, hoping that each interaction might be the one to thaw the ice between us. But Jack had changed. Living with Mom and Robert, he'd developed an entitled attitude that grew worse with each passing year. When I would pick him up in my beat-up Honda that I'd saved 3 years to buy, he'd make comments about the piece of junk I was driving. When I gave him advice about school or girls or life, he'd roll his eyes and say, "What would you know about it?" The worst part was seeing how Mom encouraged this behavior. She'd gone from the warm, loving mother I remembered to someone who measured worth by wealth and status. And in her eyes, I was firmly on the wrong side of that equation. "You should be more like your brother," she said to Jack once when I was dropping him off, not realizing I could hear them through the open window. "Wilson has no ambition, no drive. He's just like your father." Despite this, I kept trying. When I got accepted to the state university on a partial scholarship, I hoped they might be proud. I sent an announcement to their house. No response. When I graduated with my computer science degree, I invited them to the ceremony. Jack sent a text the night before. "Can't make it. Robert's taking us to the Bahamas on his yacht." By then, Dad's health was failing. Years of stress and overwork had given him heart problems, and he couldn't attend my graduation either, since he was recovering from his first heart attack. I sat alone at the ceremony, watching other graduates celebrate with their families, feeling the emptiness of those vacant seats reserved for mine. After college, I poured myself into work. I started coding in my tiny apartment, developing a cybersecurity software that caught the attention of a small tech incubator. Long nights, endless coffee, and pure determination fueled me through the launch of my startup. Success didn't come overnight, but it did come. Gradually, contract by contract, client by client, I built something I was proud of. Dad lived long enough to see the beginnings of my success, and I was able to move him into a better place, get him the medical care he needed. But 2 years ago, his heart finally gave out. At his funeral, Jack showed up late, left early, and barely acknowledged me. Mom stayed for the service, but spent most of it checking her phone. Robert didn't bother to come at all. For 2 years after that, I had no contact with them. No calls, no texts. Not even a Christmas card. I threw myself into my company, expanding our client base, developing new software solutions, building a team of talented people who shared my vision. I dated occasionally, but never let anyone get too close. Work became my refuge, my identity, my family. Then 3 weeks ago, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I'd almost forgotten. "Hey bro, it's my birthday next Saturday. Big dinner at Le Chateau at 7. You should come." Just like that, after years of silence, Jack was inviting me to his birthday dinner. No apology, no acknowledgement of the past. Just a casual invitation, as if we'd spoken last week. I stared at that text for a long time, wondering what had prompted it. Wondering if it might be a chance to finally heal our broken relationship. The text from Jack sat on my phone for 3 days before I responded. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to give him a taste of the silence he'd perfected over the years. Another part desperately wanted to believe this was an olive branch, a chance to rebuild something I'd lost long ago. "Thanks for the invite. I'll be there," I finally wrote back, keeping it simple. His response came quickly. "Cool. Dress nice. It's a fancy place." That was it. No warm expression of looking forward to seeing me. No details about who else would be there. Just a reminder that I should dress appropriately. Still, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this was just Jack's way. His emotional, stunted method of reaching out. I called my best friend Michael that night to tell him about the invitation. "So your brother ghosts you for years, then suddenly wants you at his birthday dinner?" Michael asked, skepticism evident in his voice. "At one of the most expensive restaurants in town. Something feels off about this, Wilson." "Maybe he's changed," I said, though I didn't entirely believe it myself. "Maybe now that we're both adults, he wants to reconnect." "Just be careful," Michael warned. "The last time you saw them was at your dad's funeral, and they barely gave you the time of day. People don't usually change that dramatically." I knew Michael was right to be cautious. The last family gathering had been painful in ways I still found hard to articulate. Standing by my father's grave, watching Jack check his watch repeatedly, hearing Mom talk about how these things happen as if Dad's death was a minor inconvenience in her day. The memory still stung. But, despite my reservations, I decided to go. I spent the next week preparing for the dinner. I bought a new suit, dark blue, with a subtle pattern more expensive than I would normally allow myself. I got a haircut, invested in a new pair of dress shoes, even splurged on a designer watch I couldn't really afford. If I was going to walk into Le Chateau, I didn't want to give Jack or anyone else reason to look down on me. Finding the right gift was harder. What do you get for a brother who has everything, who has been given everything? In the end, I decided on a vintage, limited edition watch I found at a specialty shop. It cost nearly $2,000. Almost my entire discretionary budget for the month, but I wanted to make a statement. I wanted to show that despite everything, I still cared enough to put thought into a gift for him. The day before the dinner, I looked up Le Chateau online. It was even more exclusive than I'd realized, the kind of place where celebrities dined when they were in town, where politicians held fundraisers, where the city's elite celebrated special occasions. The website didn't even list prices, just elegant photos of artfully plated food and testimonials from satisfied customers. "An unparalleled dining experience," one read. "Worth every penny," said another, though. They conspicuously didn't mention how many pennies that might be. As Saturday approached, my anxiety grew. I rehearsed conversation topics in my head, practiced anecdotes about work that were impressive but not boastful, reminded myself to ask questions about Jack's life and actually listen to the answers. I was determined to be the bigger person to extend grace, even if none had been extended to me. The night of the dinner, I spent an hour getting ready, making sure every detail was perfect. I placed Jack's carefully wrapped gift in my car and programmed the restaurant address into my GPS. The drive took 30 minutes, leading me to a part of town I rarely visited, where the streets were lined with luxury boutiques and exotic car dealerships. Le Chateau itself was housed in a renovated historic mansion set back from the road behind ornate iron gates. A valet approached as I pulled up, looking momentarily surprised at my relatively modest car among the Bentleys and Maseratis. I handed him my keys and took a deep breath before walking up the stone pathway to the entrance. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors. The maitre d' stood behind a polished wooden podium, his expression carefully neutral as he looked me over. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here with the Bennett party," I said, realizing I didn't know if Jack had made the reservation under his name or Robert's for Jack Bennett's birthday. Something flickered across the maitre d's face. Recognition. Surprise, I couldn't quite read it. He consulted his tablet, then nodded. "Ah yes, they're already seated. Follow me, please." As we wound through the restaurant past tables of well-dressed diners sipping champagne and speaking in hushed tones, I caught sight of Jack's social media post from earlier that day. Looking forward to celebrating with family tonight, he'd written with a photo of Mom Robert and himself dressed to the nines. I hadn't been included in the photo, of course, but seeing the word family had reinforced my hope that this night might mark a new beginning. But as the maitre d' led me toward the back of the restaurant, toward a large round table where I could see Jack holding court amid laughter and raised glasses, a knot formed in my stomach. Something about his smile, the way he leaned in to whisper something to the woman beside him, then glanced toward the entrance where I stood, felt calculated, rehearsed even. I pushed the thought aside. I was being paranoid, letting years of disappointment color this new opportunity. Tonight would be different. It had to be. The maitre d' stepped aside as we reached the table, making a subtle gesture to announce my arrival. 8 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, and the conversation abruptly stopped. "Wilson," Jack said, rising halfway from his seat. "You made it." His tone suggested mild surprise, as if he hadn't actually expected me to show up. He was wearing what I assumed was a custom-tailored suit with a designer watch far more expensive than the one I'd bought him glinting on his wrist. "Happy birthday, Jack," I said, stepping forward with his gift in hand. "Thanks for inviting me." Jack took the package with a quick nod and set it on a side table without opening it next to a small pile of other presents. "You remember Mom, of course," he said, gesturing to where our mother sat beside a silver-haired man I recognized as Robert. Mom gave me a tight smile. "Wilson, it's been a while." She made no move to get up, so I awkwardly leaned down to give her a half hug that she barely returned. Robert extended his hand. "Wilson, good to see you again." His handshake was firm, businesslike, the kind meant to establish dominance. I doubted he remembered that we'd only met twice before, both times at formal occasions where we'd barely exchanged words. "This is my wife, Melissa," Jack continued, indicating the slim blonde woman beside him who I'd never met or even heard about. We must have fallen out of touch before they got engaged, though judging by the massive diamond on her finger, they'd been married for some time. "Nice to meet you," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jack proceeded to introduce the rest of the table. Melissa's parents, Arthur and Patricia. Jack's college friend Brad, and his wife Stephanie. Everyone was immaculately dressed. The women draped in designer dresses and fine jewelry, the men in tailored suits with expensive watches and cufflinks. I suddenly felt self-conscious about my own outfit. While my suit was the nicest I owned, it clearly wasn't in the same league as the bespoke attire around the table. My watch, which had seemed impressive in the store, now felt embarrassingly modest compared to the Rolexes and Patek Philippes adorning the other wrists at the table. "Well," I said, trying to maintain my composure, "it's great to meet everyone. Should I?" I gestured toward the table, looking for an empty chair, but saw that all the seats were occupied. Jack exchanged a glance with Robert, then looked back at me with a smirk that sent a chill down my spine. Sorry, this table's for family only, he said, the emphasis on family, subtle but unmistakable. He pointed toward the kitchen entrance. We had to put you over there. I followed his gesture to see a small fold-out chair positioned near the swinging doors to the kitchen, right beside a decorative partition that partially concealed a trash can. The chair sat at a tiny side table, barely big enough for a single-place setting, at least 10 feet away from the main table where everyone else was seated. A ripple of laughter went around the table, quickly stifled but unmistakable. Mom looked down at her plate, saying nothing. Robert didn't bother hiding his amused smile. Is this a joke? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The reservation was for 8, Jack said with an exaggerated shrug. We didn't think you'd actually come, but the restaurant was kind enough to set up an extra spot for you. He gestured again to the fold-out chair. It's the best they could do on short notice. Another round of poorly concealed laughter. Melissa whispered something to Jack that made him snicker. I stood, frozen humiliation washing over me in waves. Every instinct screamed at me to walk out to preserve what little dignity I had left. But something else, some stubborn part of me that refused to give Jack the satisfaction, made me nod stiffly and walk over to the sad little chair by the kitchen door. As I sat down, a waiter emerged from the kitchen, nearly bumping into me before stopping short with a surprised expression. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see you there. He looked confused about my placement, glancing between me and the main table with a furrowed brow. It's fine, I said quietly. Could I see a menu, please? Of course. He hurried away, returning moments later with a leather-bound menu and a glass of water. Are you with that party? He asked hesitantly, nodding toward Jack's table. Supposedly, I replied. For the next 20 minutes, I sat alone while the main table enjoyed cocktails and appetizers. The waitstaff seemed to have been instructed to focus their attention on the family table, as Jack had called it. I had to flag down my waiter multiple times just to place an order for a simple appetizer and a glass of wine. From my isolated position, I could hear snippets of conversation from the main table. Jack was loudly reminiscing about family vacations I'd never been invited on, inside jokes. I wasn't part of memories that deliberately excluded me. Remember that Christmas in Aspen, he asked, looking at Mom and Robert. When we all got snowed in at the chalet and had to open presents a day late, I stared at my plate. That Christmas, I had been working double shifts at a convenience store to help Dad pay for his heart medication, eating microwave ramen alone in our apartment, while apparently my family was enjoying a luxury ski vacation. And the summer we spent sailing around the Greek islands, Mom added, her voice carrying clearly to where I sat. Jack, you were so funny trying to learn Greek from those local fishermen. More laughter, more stories, more pointed reminders of the life they had shared without me. Each anecdote felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. I caught Jack glancing in my direction, occasionally gauging my reaction, seeming pleased by my discomfort. When my wine finally arrived, I took a larger sip than I'd intended, needing something to steady my nerves. The waiter who brought it gave me a sympathetic look. Is everything all right, sir? He asked quietly. I forced a smile. Everything's fine. Thank you. But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this situation was fine. And as the evening progressed, it became increasingly clear that my humiliation was not an unfortunate side effect of poor planning, but the entire point of my invitation. As the dinner service began in earnest, the contrast between my experience and the main tables became even more pronounced. Jack ordered several bottles of expensive champagne for the table, making a show of popping the corks and filling everyone's glasses. Not for him, he told the waiter when the man started to move in my direction with the bottle. He's not drinking with us. I ordered my own glass of wine instead, a modest Cabernet that was the least expensive option on the menu. When the waiter brought it, Jack commented loudly enough for me to hear, I guess some people have to stick to a budget. The food arrived next. While the main table shared elaborate appetizers, exotic seafood towers, and delicate amuse-bouches presented with flourish by the chef himself, I ate my simple Caesar salad alone. No one offered to share their bounty. No one even acknowledged that I might be part of their celebration. Between courses, Jack took control of the conversation, positioning himself as the entertaining host. To my horror, he began telling stories about my childhood, twisting innocent memories into embarrassing anecdotes designed to make me look foolish. Did you know, he said to the table at large, that Wilson wet the bed until he was 12. Mom had to put plastic sheets on his mattress. This was a complete fabrication, but the table erupted in laughter anyway. I felt my face burning as I stared at my plate. And he was so afraid of the dark that he slept with the lights on until high school Jack continued embellishing further. What a baby. I tried to join the conversation once when they briefly discussed a new tech innovation that was related to my field. Actually, my company has been working on something similar, I began. Oh, Wilson has a company, Jack interrupted with exaggerated interest. Tell us all about your little startup, bro. How many employees do you have now? 2. 3. Before I could answer, he had already turned away, changing the subject to Robert's latest business acquisition. Now that's a real company, he said pointedly. 20 million in revenue last quarter alone. Robert beamed with pride. And Jack here is going to be taking a leadership role very soon, he announced, clapping my brother on the shoulder. Been grooming him for years. Nobody understands the business like he does. That's our Jack, Mom added. Always the achiever. I thought about the irony of this statement. Jack had been handed everything on a silver platter, including apparently a high-level position in Robert's company that he hadn't earned. Meanwhile, I had built my little startup from nothing through years of hard work and determination, growing it into a successful enterprise that now employed 30 people and had clients across 3 continents. But no one at the table was interested in that story. As the main courses arrived, Mom pulled out her phone and began showing photos to Melissa's parents. Here we are at our villa in Tuscany last spring, she said. And this is from our Christmas cruise. Through the Caribbean. I caught glimpses of the images as she passed the phone around. Family photos of the 3 of them smiling in exotic locations, looking every bit the perfect family. Photos taken during holidays when I'd reached out, hoping for even a text message in return, only to be met with silence. When Jack stood to make a toast midway through dinner, I thought perhaps the tone might shift. I raised my glass, ready to join in a sincere wish for his happiness despite everything. To family, Jack said, his glass held high. The real kind. The kind that sticks together through everything. Everyone clinked glasses. No one looked my way. I lowered my glass slowly, the message unmistakable. Then, against my better judgment, I stood and raised my glass again. Happy birthday, Jack, I said. Despite our differences, I hope this year brings you happiness and success. The table fell silent. Jack stared at me, clearly annoyed by my interruption of his moment. Then he smirked. Here's to outsiders, who don't know when they're not wanted. He countered, raising his glass again. May they eventually get the message. More laughter. More clinking glasses. Mom at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but she said nothing in my defense. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. In the elegant marble bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. What was I doing here? Why was I subjecting myself to this deliberate cruelty? The smart thing would be to leave now, to walk out with whatever dignity I had left. As I was drying my hands, the bathroom door opened, and Jack and Robert entered deep in conversation. They stopped short when they saw me. Well, if it isn't the charity case, Robert said, not bothering to lower his voice. Enjoying the free meal. Nothing's free in life, Robert, I replied evenly. I learned that lesson a long time ago. Some people have to learn it the hard way. Jack laughed, exchanging a look with Robert that I couldn't quite interpret. Anyway, don't hang around in here too long. You might miss the cake. They left, their laughter echoing behind them. I took a deep breath, steeling myself to return to the dining room. Part of me still wanted to leave to escape this toxic situation. But another part, a stubborn, perhaps foolish part, refused to give them the satisfaction of driving me away. I decided to stay, if only to deprive Jack of the story he clearly wanted to tell later about how I'd run away with my tail between my legs. When I returned to my isolated seat, the lavish birthday cake had indeed arrived, a multi-tiered creation adorned with edible gold leaf and sparklers. Everyone at the main table received a generous slice served on fine china with artful drizzles of sauce and quenelles of whipped cream. No one offered me a piece. The waitstaff, perhaps sensing the dynamic at play, didn't bring me one either. I sat watching as they all savored the presumably delicious dessert, discussing its flavor and complexity as if I weren't even there. As the cake plates were being cleared, Jack stood up again, tapping his glass for attention. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying throughout the restaurant. "As some of you already know, Robert has decided to name me the new CEO of Bennett Luxury Automobiles, effective next month." Applause erupted around the table. Robert stood to embrace Jack, looking every inch the proud father. Mom wiped away a tear of joy. To the youngest CEO in the company's history, Robert proclaimed, raising his glass yet again. "Jack, you've earned this." I bit back a bitter laugh. Earned it? Jack had been handed a prestigious position at the top of a successful company simply because he was Robert's stepson. Meanwhile, I had started with nothing, built something from the ground up, and none of them even cared enough to ask what I did for a living. As the celebration of Jack's accomplishment continued, I sat in silence, my hurt gradually transforming into something else. Something colder, more calculating. I was beginning to understand that I hadn't been invited here as a gesture of reconciliation. I'd been invited as a prop, someone to be diminished, so Jack could feel elevated by comparison. This entire evening had been orchestrated for my humiliation. Well, if that was the game, perhaps it was time I started playing too. After nearly 3 hours of subtle and not-so-subtle jabs, excessive drinking, and ostentatious food orders, the dinner finally seemed to be winding down. The table had consumed at least 6 bottles of premium champagne and wine, ordered multiple seafood towers, the most expensive steaks on the menu, and added countless supplements and add-ons to their meals. Truffle shavings on everything, Jack had instructed the waiter early on. And bring out that special Japanese Wagyu beef I called about earlier. Price is no object. I had watched as the extravagance escalated throughout the evening, with Jack encouraging everyone to order the most expensive items available. "Get the lobster tail add-on," he told Melissa's mother. "And Dad, you have to try the 30-year age scotch they keep for special customers." Robert had nodded approvingly at Jack's lavish hosting. "That's how we do it in this family," he'd said loudly. "Nothing but the best. Money is no object when you're celebrating with family." The emphasis on family hadn't been lost on me, nor had the pointed glances in my direction. I'd kept to my modest order, a simple steak and a couple of glasses of wine, aware that even this would stretch my budget for the week. As the dessert plates were cleared and espressos were served to the main table, I noticed Jack and Melissa whispering to each other occasionally, looking my way, and laughing behind their hands. Something about their expressions made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They were plotting something, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. The restaurant had mostly emptied out by this point, the other diners having finished their meals and departed into the night. Our party, or rather their party, was among the last remaining. The waitstaff began the subtle dance of encouraging departure, refreshing water glasses one final time, asking if there would be anything else, bringing small mints with the last round of coffee. Finally, the maitre d' approached our table, followed by our primary waiter, who carried a silver tray with a single leather portfolio. "I trust everything was to your satisfaction this evening," the maitre d' asked, directing his question to the table at large. "Exceptional as always," Robert replied with the confidence of a regular patron. The maitre d' nodded graciously, then gestured to the waiter, who stepped forward with the bill. To my astonishment, instead of placing it in front of Robert or Jack, he walked directly to my sad little table by the kitchen and set it down in front of me. "Your bill, sir," he said, his expression professionally neutral. I stared at the leather portfolio in confusion. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I'm not hosting this dinner." The waiter glanced uncomfortably toward the main table. "I was specifically instructed to bring the bill to you, sir." By Mr. Jack Bennett. All conversation at the main table had stopped. Everyone was watching now, and I could see the anticipation in their faces. This, then, was the punchline to the elaborate joke they'd been setting up all evening. With a growing sense of dread, I opened the portfolio and looked at the bill. The total, printed in bold at the bottom of the page, made my blood run cold: $3,200.17. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $3,200 was more than my monthly mortgage payment. It was about what I had left in my checking account after paying all my bills and buying Jack's expensive birthday gift. It was an impossible sum for me to casually spend on a dinner where I'd been treated like an unwelcome intruder. I looked up to see Jack watching me, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This had been his plan, all along. Invite me to a dinner where I'd be humiliated, then stick me with an astronomical bill I couldn't possibly afford to pay. The perfect cap to an evening of cruelty. "Is there a problem?" Jack called from the main table, feigning innocence but unable to keep the glee from his voice. "Why is the bill being given to me?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Oh, didn't I mention?" Jack replied. "The birthday boy doesn't pay. That's the tradition. And since you're the only non-family member here," he trailed off with a shrug. Confusion spread across the table. Apparently not everyone had been in on this particular part of Jack's plan. "I thought you were covering this," Jack Robert said, his jovial mood suddenly evaporating. "That's what you said when you organized this whole thing." "Just a little miscommunication," Jack replied, winking at his friends. "No big deal. Wilson can handle it right, bro. Unless..." He let the implication hang in the air. Unless I couldn't afford it. Unless I was as pathetic as he'd been making me out to be all night. Mom looked distinctly uncomfortable now. "Jack, that's not appropriate," she said, but her protest was weak, half-hearted. The waiter stood awkwardly beside my table, clearly caught in the middle of a situation he hadn't signed up for. "Sir," he said quietly to me, "would you like me to give you a moment?" I looked at the bill again, then at the expectant faces watching me from the main table. They were waiting for my humiliation to be complete for me. To admit I couldn't pay, to beg for help, to slink away in shame. Jack had orchestrated this entire evening for exactly this moment. Something shifted inside me. A lifetime of taking the high road of extending grace that was never reciprocated, of trying to maintain connections with people who only wanted to use and diminish me, suddenly seemed like a fool's errand. The anger I'd been suppressing all evening crystallized into a cold, clear resolve. I looked up at the waiter and smiled. "Is this bill for the entire party?" I asked. "Yes, sir," he confirmed. "For the entire Bennett party." I nodded thoughtfully, then placed the portfolio back on the table. "Not my table," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. The waiter blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir." "This isn't my table," I repeated, gesturing toward the main group. "As Mr. Bennett so clearly stated earlier, that table is for family only. I was explicitly told I'm not part of that table. I was seated separately, served separately, and treated separately all evening." I pulled out my wallet and extracted my credit card. "I'll pay for what I ordered, of course. 1 Caesar salad, 1 steak, and 2 glasses of wine. But the rest of the bill belongs to the family table, not to me." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see Jack's smug expression faltering as he realized his plan might be backfiring. "That's ridiculous," he sputtered finally. "You can't just refuse to pay." "Actually, he can," the waiter said, finding his voice. "If you were seated separately as a separate party, then you're responsible only for your own charges." He turned to me. "Let me recalculate your portion, sir." "This is absurd," Robert interjected, his face reddening. "Wilson, you know very well you were invited as part of this dinner." "Was I?" I asked calmly. Because I distinctly remember Jack saying, and I quote, "Sorry, this table's for family only." I pulled out my phone. In fact, I have it recorded. I started recording when I arrived, just in case something like this happened. I hadn't actually been recording, but the bluff worked beautifully. Jack's face drained of color. "You can't be serious," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Completely serious," I replied. The maitre d' himself seated me separately at Jack's request. "I've been treated as a separate customer all evening. I'm happy to get the restaurant manager involved if there's any confusion." The waiter, who had clearly witnessed the entire uncomfortable dynamic throughout the night, nodded. "I'll speak with the manager. And have your check separated, sir." As he walked away, panic began to spread around the main table. This clearly wasn't how they had expected the evening to end. Robert, Jack said urgently, "This is just a misunderstanding. You can cover it, right?" But Robert's genial demeanor had vanished completely. "This was your event, Jack. You told me you had it handled. I didn't bring my wallet because you insisted on taking care of everything. I thought Wilson would pay," Jack hissed. "That was the whole point." "The whole point of what I asked, though?" I knew the answer. "The whole point of inviting me after years of no contact. The whole point of seating me by the trash cans. The whole point of humiliating me all night. Jack had no response to that. The truth was written all over his face. The waiter returned with 2 separate checks. "Here's your portion, sir," he said, handing me a much smaller bill. "It comes to $87.22. I added a generous tip, signed the receipt, and stood up. "Thank you for your service tonight," I told the waiter. "You handled a difficult situation with remarkable professionalism." Then I turned to the main table where the realization of their predicament was still sinking in. $3,000 of extravagant food and drink, and suddenly no one to pay for it. For what it's worth, I said my company, that little startup Jack was so dismissive of earlier, now employs 30 people across 3 offices. We had $12 million in revenue last year, and we're on track to double that this year. I built it from nothing, with no handouts, no nepotism. Just hard work and determination. I let that sink in for a moment. Something none of you would understand. The shock on their faces was almost worth the hours of humiliation I'd endured. Mom looked like she might actually be seeing me for the first time in years. Robert was reassessing me with new eyes. And Jack looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under his entire worldview. I walked over to the side table and picked up the gift I'd brought for Jack. "This is actually for family," I said. "And clearly that's not us." I tucked the package under my arm and turned to leave. "Wilson, wait," Jack called, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "Let's talk about this. We're still brothers, right? Blood is thicker than water and all that." I stopped and looked back at him. "You know, Jack, the full quote is, 'The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb.' It actually means the opposite of what most people think. The bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into." I smiled slightly. "Something to think about while you figure out how to pay that bill." Then I walked out of Le Chateau, leaving them to deal with the consequences of their cruelty. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The night air felt fresh and cleansing as I stepped outside Le Chateau. The valet brought my car around, and I tipped him generously, feeling a strange lightness despite the emotional battering I'd just endured. As I drove away, I could see through the restaurant's windows that the table was still in chaos, with Jack gesticulating wildly and Robert's face flushed with anger. I had barely made it home when my phone began buzzing with incoming messages. Jack, of course, was the first. "What the hell was that? You can't just walk out on a bill. Get back here." Then, "This isn't funny, Wilson. They're threatening to call the police. And finally, I know you have money. You said so yourself. Just pay the damn bill and we'll sort it out later." I silenced my phone and poured myself a whiskey, savoring the quiet of my home and the sweet taste of having finally stood up for myself after years of taking whatever scraps of attention my family deigned to throw my way. The next morning, I met Michael for our regular Sunday brunch and told him everything. "I can't believe you sat through that entire dinner," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I would have walked out the minute I saw that fold-up chair. Part of me wishes I had," I admitted. "But then I wouldn't have had the satisfaction of turning the tables on them at the end." "So what happened with the bill?" Michael asked. "Did they actually have to pay it?" From what I can gather from the 47 texts Jack sent me, Robert eventually had to call his assistant to bring his credit card to the restaurant. The manager made them wait there for over an hour. I couldn't help the small smile that formed at the thought. Apparently, the staff was not amused by their behavior once they understood what had happened. "Serves them right," Michael said firmly. "What kind of person invites their brother to dinner just to humiliate him and stick him with the bill? That's sociopathic." I nodded, the smile fading as I considered the deeper implications of the night. The thing is, I've spent years making excuses for them, telling myself that Jack was just influenced by Mom and Robert, that he didn't really mean to be cruel, that if I just kept trying eventually they'd accept me back into the fold. I took a sip of my coffee. But last night made it crystal clear. The cruelty is the point. They enjoy making me feel small because it makes them feel big. "So what now?" Michael asked. "Are you just done with them?" "I think I have to be," I said slowly. "For my own sanity. I can't keep chasing approval from people who are invested in never giving it." Over the next few days, the messages continued to pour in. Jack's tone evolved from angry demands to manipulative pleas and finally to something resembling contrition, though I suspected it wasn't genuine. Mom called 7 times, leaving voicemails that started defensive but gradually became more conciliatory. "Wilson, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding," the first one began. Jack was just playing a joke that got out of hand. By the 7th call, her tone had changed. "Please call me back. I had no idea how successful you've become. We should talk." That told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. It wasn't my feelings she was concerned about or the years of exclusion and dismissal. It was the discovery that I had money and status now, that I might be worth acknowledging after all. Robert didn't contact me directly, but I heard through a business associate that he'd been asking questions about my company, trying to verify my claims about our revenue and growth. The idea that I might be successful on my own terms seemed to have shaken his perception of the natural order of things. A week after the disastrous dinner, I received an unexpected update from a former college classmate who now worked at a luxury car dealership in the Bennett Automotive Group. "You're not going to believe this," he texted. "Jack Bennett just traded in his Ferrari for a much cheaper model. Word around the dealership is he had to cover some massive unexpected expense." I couldn't help but laugh at that. $3,000 might not have been enough to force most people to downgrade their supercar, but Jack had always lived beyond his means, leveraging Robert's name and connections to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. The dinner bill had apparently been the tipping point for his precarious finances. 2 weeks after the dinner, when I was beginning to think the whole episode might finally be behind me, my assistant buzzed my office intercom. "Mr. Bennett, there's a Jack Bennett here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment but insists it's important. Says he's your brother." I considered having her send him away, but curiosity got the better of me. Jack looked different from the last time I'd seen him, less polished somehow. His suit was still expensive, but his expression was strained, his confident swagger replaced by an uncomfortable hesitancy as he entered my office. "Nice place," he said, looking around at my corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Impressive. What can I do for you, Jack?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look about the other night. Things got out of hand. I may have taken a joke too far." "A joke," I repeated flatly. "Was the joke the part where you seated me by the trash cans, or the part where you tried to stick me with a $3,000 bill I never agreed to pay?" "Both, I guess," he said, with a weak attempt at a smile. "Bad judgment on my part. What do you want, Jack? I'm busy." He took a deep breath. "The thing is, there's been some restructuring at Robert's company. The CEO position we talked about at dinner, it's not happening anymore." "Let me guess," I said. "Robert wasn't impressed by your behavior at the restaurant." Jack's expression confirmed my suspicion. He said it showed poor judgment and lack of character, he admitted. "Which is ridiculous. It was just a prank that backfired." "A prank," I repeated. "Is that what you call systematically excluding and humiliating someone for years? One long, elaborate prank." He had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but quickly rallied. "Anyway, I'm exploring other opportunities now, and I thought, given your company's success..." He trailed off meaningfully. I almost laughed. "You want a job? After everything you waltz in here expecting me to give you a job? We're still brothers," he said. As if that explained everything. "Family looks out for each other." "Family," I said, testing the word. Where was that family feeling when Dad was sick and needed help? Where was it when I graduated college with no one in the audience? Where was it for the last 10 years when I reached out over and over, only to be ignored or dismissed? "That's all in the past," Jack said dismissively. "We should move forward. I have a lot of connections that could be valuable to your company. I could open doors for you." I studied him for a long moment. There was no real remorse there, just opportunism. Jack wasn't sorry for how he'd treated me. He was sorry that it had backfired on him. He wasn't interested in being my brother. He was interested in using me as a safety net now that Robert had cut him loose. "No," I said simply. "No," just like that. He seemed genuinely surprised. "Just like that," I confirmed. I don't need your connections, Jack. I built this company without any help from you, or Mom, or Robert. And I'm not going to give you a job you haven't earned just because we happen to share DNA. So that's it, he asked, anger creeping into his voice. You're turning your back on family. I'm not turning my back on family, I corrected him. I'm finally accepting that I don't have one, at least not in the traditional sense. What I have is myself, my friends, and the people I've chosen to surround myself with who actually value and respect me. Jack's facade cracked then, his entitlement showing through. You'll regret this, he said. You think you're so successful, but you're nothing compared to Robert. One word from him and he could crush your little company. I just smiled. You still don't get it, do you? That dinner showed me exactly who you are, who all of you are. And I'm done seeking approval from people who only see my value in terms of what I can do for them. I stood up. I think we're finished here. As I watched Jack storm out of my office, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet certainty that I'd finally broken free of a toxic pattern that had defined too much of my life. The door closed behind him, and with it a chapter of my life that had brought me nothing but pain. The drive home that evening gave me time to process Jack's visit and my own reaction to it. For so long I'd been caught in a cycle of hoping for reconciliation, being disappointed, and then hoping again. Breaking that cycle felt both liberating and slightly disorienting, like stepping off a merry-go-round after spinning for too long. Michael called as I was making dinner. So Jack actually had the nerve to ask you for a job, after everything he did. Yep, I said, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. Apparently Robert revoked the CEO offer after the restaurant fiasco, and now Jack's desperate. Good for Robert, Michael said. Maybe the man has some standards after all. Or maybe he just doesn't want someone who would embarrass him in public, I countered. Either way, Jack's facing consequences for his actions, probably for the first time in his life. And how do you feel about all this? Michael asked. About cutting ties with your family for good. I paused, knife hovering over an onion. Honestly, I feel sad. Not about Jack specifically or even about Mom, but about the idea of family I've been chasing all these years. I wanted so badly to believe that blood connections meant something, that underneath all the hurt and rejection, there was still some bond that mattered. Family doesn't have to be blood, Michael reminded me gently. You know that better than most. He was right. Over the years, I'd built a network of friends and colleagues who had shown me more loyalty and genuine care than my blood relatives ever had. People like Michael, who had helped me move apartments 3 times and sat with me in the hospital when Dad had his final heart attack. People like my assistant Rachel, who remembered my birthday every year and made sure I never worked through lunch. People like my team at work who respected me not because of my last name or connections, but because of my skills and how I treated them. In the weeks that followed, the messages from Mom and Jack continued, though, with decreasing frequency. Mom's took on a desperate quality when she realized I wasn't going to respond. Wilson, please. We're still family. You can't just cut us off. But I could, and I had. It wasn't spite or revenge driving my decision, but self-preservation. I'd finally recognized that maintaining connections with people who only brought pain and humiliation into my life wasn't noble or forgiving. It was self-destructive. About a month after the dinner incident, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Melissa, Jack's wife. Thought you should know he had to sell his Porsche to cover some debts. Maybe now you're satisfied. I didn't respond. Jack's financial problems weren't my concern, and I took no pleasure in his difficulties. What mattered to me was moving forward, focusing on my own life and the positive relationships within it. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd considered for years, but had always put off. Dr. Thomas helped me work through the complicated grief of losing a family that, in many ways, I'd never really had. He helped me understand that my desire for reconciliation had been natural and human, but that accepting the reality of who my family members actually were was an important step in my own healing. The fantasy of family can be more powerful than the reality, he told me during one session. You've been grieving for a family that exists only in your hopes, not in reality. That's a particularly difficult kind of loss to process. 6 weeks after the restaurant incident, my company was featured in a major tech publication for a cybersecurity innovation we'd developed. The article included a profile of me describing my path from humble beginnings to successful CEO. I didn't mention my family situation in the interview, focusing instead on the technical challenges we'd overcome and our vision for the future. The day after the article was published, Jack called again. I let it go to voicemail. "Wilson, it's Jack. Saw your article. Impressive stuff. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said. And you're right. I haven't been a good brother. I want to make amends. For real this time. Call me back." I didn't call him back. Not because I couldn't forgive him, but because his pattern was clear. He only reached out when he wanted something, when I had something he could use or leverage. His interest in making amends had only materialized after I'd been publicly recognized for success. It wasn't about brotherhood. It was about opportunity. Instead of responding to Jack, I focused on building the life and relationships I actually wanted. I hosted a dinner party at my home, inviting friends who had supported me through thick and thin. We ate good food, shared stories, and laughed together in a way that felt genuine and warm, so different from the calculated cruelty of Jack's birthday dinner. As I looked around my dining table at the smiling faces of people who truly cared about me, I realized something important. I wasn't missing out on family by cutting ties with Jack and Mom. I was finally allowing myself to embrace the authentic connections I'd already built. A year after the infamous dinner, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Michael was marrying his longtime partner, and he'd asked me to be his best man. As I called to accept, I felt a surge of gratitude for the family I'd chosen, the one that had chosen me back. "You know why I want you as my best man?" Michael asked. "Because when I think about the people who have been there for me consistently, who I can count on no matter what, you're at the top of the list. That's what family really means." I thought about my journey over the past year, from the humiliation of that fold-up chair by the trash cans to the peace I'd found in accepting that some relationships can't and shouldn't be saved. The lesson hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, love, and mutual support. I didn't lose family that night at Le Chateau. I finally found the strength to stop chasing people who never saw my worth. And in doing so, I made room for the genuine connections that had been there all along, waiting for me to recognize their value. As I look back on that painful evening now, I'm actually grateful. Not for the cruelty or the attempted humiliation, but for the clarity it brought. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom with certain relationships to realize which ones truly deserve your energy and commitment. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to step away from toxic family relationships? How did you find the strength to set those boundaries? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose your own well-being sometimes. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate you, not those who only want to use or diminish you.